But Montana woods in February look like someone painted silence in white. 3 feet of snow blanket, the Flathead National Forest, turning every pine and rock into a shiny sculpture, each ice crystal, catching what little sunlight there is, and throwing it back like scattered diamonds. A bitter wind cuts through the trees, hurling tiny shards of ice against your face until you flinch. In that frozen stillness, life and death feel closer than breathing. One wrong move and the cold can claim you in minutes. Against that vast white stage, a tiny figure steps out of the shadows. A bobcat cub so small and fragile, he might as well be made of snow himself. But in the way his ears flatten and his stubby tail twitches, you sense he's about to learn that beauty and danger in the wild are 2 sides of the same coin. Deep beneath a fallen spruce, Max had hidden for 3 days, ears ringing with hunger and fear ever since his mother vanished on a hunt. A hunt! 4 months old, barely 12 pounds, he was clothed in reddish-brown fur, laced with black rosettes. His kitten Fluff still clinging around his neck like a baby blanket. He'd watched his mother chase rabbits and squirrels, but instinct only teaches so much when you're left alone. Each step across the snow felt like walking a tightrope. Stooped low, head swiveling for sound, nostrils flaring at every scent carried by the wind. He could see his own breath, a little cloud of hope that disappeared in the cold air. Too young to fight, too hungry to wait, Max dared to leave his den and face the world, and in that first moment of boldness, he also stepped into its greatest storm. 20 miles to the east, on a quiet ranch near Whitefish, Jim Harrison strapped on his heavy winter boots and took one last look at his packed truck. At 58, he'd spent 30 years as a wildlife biologist for Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and the lines on his face were like topographic maps of every mountain trail he'd walked. His dark hair and beard were threaded with silver, echoing the frost that baked his gear each morning. Sir. Inside the house, his daughter Sarah, nicknamed a kiddo since she was small, called out that a storm was coming in by afternoon, offering him a thermos of her famous coffee. Sarah, now 28 and a veterinarian at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Centre, had inherited his love for creatures big and small. He smiled, thinking of her gentle hands and quick mind, and promised to be careful. Then he climbed into his Ford F-150, snow chains rattling as the engine roared to life, unaware that this routine day would challenge everything he believed about nature's balance. At the same time, Max crept farther from his den than ever before. Chew. Hunger gnawed at his belly like a living thing, drowning every echo of caution in a desperate urge to survive. He padded through the forest, his spotted fur offering camouflage, eyes bright with raw need. When he heard the scratch of tiny claws on a nearby log, his heart kicked into gear. Was it a squirrel, a pine marten, or something bigger? He sank into a crouch, muscles coiled, ready to pounce on whatever might fill his empty stomach. But before he could move, another sound made him freeze, the steady crunch of paws in the snow, too heavy and too many for a small prey animal. He glanced around, whiskers quivering. Something was coming, and it wasn't going to let him go without a fight. 5 wolves emerged like wraiths from the thicket, their coats brushing the frosted branches, breath steaming in the cold air. Shadow, the battle-scarred alpha female with a dark grey pelt, led the circle, amber eyes locked on the cub, Ub. To her right, a massive male with a white chest blocked the deeper woods. To her left and behind, 3 younger wolves closed in, tongues lolling, teeth flashing. Winter had starved them out of elk and deer, forcing them to hunt smaller quarry. Their coats were thick, their bodies lean with hunger, and each looked at the cub as though he were a walking banquet. Max's heart hammered so hard, it nearly drowned out the wind. He hissed, standing his ground as best he could, but he was no match for a pack that moved with the silent precision of a storm front. Meanwhile, Jim had just topped off his snowmobile-style monitoring station, a wooden box designed to record wolf howls when a sound cut through the woods like a blade. The high-pitched cry of terror that no animal his years of tracking had ever made. So, it wasn't a deer's bleat or an eagle's screech, it was raw, fractured panic. Without thinking, he grabbed his snowshoes and strapped them on. The crampons sinking into the drifts, he slung his tranquilizer gun over his shoulder, though he'd vowed to use it only as a last resort. Every step crackled in the stillness as he followed the cry, guided only by urgency and a primal need to help something in danger. What would he find? He crested a snowy rise and froze. Below him, against a granite outcrop dusted in frost, the bobcat cub faced down, a circle of wolves. The cub's small frame bristled with defiance, claws flashing at empty air, while 5 wolves pressed in like shadows closing on a flame. A flame. Jim's breath caught in his chest, a tight knot of disbelief and dread tightening his throat. Predator and prey. Locked in a moment, where only one could survive. His professional training told him to stand back, let nature decide. Yet the cub's terrified howl echoed something deeper. Maybe a corner of his heart that refused to accept certain death without a fight. He reached into his pack and pulled out a canister of wolf deterrent. Years of fieldwork distilled into a device that emitted a shrill frequency and released a scent mimicking a wolf's greatest foe. Taking a steadying breath, he lobbed it into the space between the wolves and their prey. Almost instantly, a high-pitched squeal pierced the air, setting every wolf's nerves on edge. A musky odor followed, and Shadow's ears flattened as she recoiled, sending a ripple of confusion through her pack. The wolves hesitated, heads tilting as if in question, then one by one they melted back into the trees, leaving nothing but footprints behind. Jim held his breath until the last grey shape vanished, and then he exhaled, the cold air rushing in and out of his lungs like a wince of relief. He knelt beside the cub, whose ribs showed through his patchy coat and whose eyes were glassy with dehydration. "Easy there, little warrior," Jim murmured, voice soft enough not to startle him. So, carefully, he draped his own jacket over the trembling animal and wrapped him snugly, the fabric cradling the cub's weight like a bundle of hope. The cub hissed weakly, but didn't try to flee. He was too spent, too cold, too hungry. Jim marveled at how feather-light the cub felt, too light for a 4-month-old. His gaze softened as he thought of Sarah's laugh when she saw her first rehab patient of the day. "She'll love you," he whispered, lifting the bundle and heading back to his truck, each crunch of snow a reminder that rescue was just beginning. The drive back to the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was tense. The sky had grown heavy with incoming snow, and every curve in the road felt endless as Jim kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the bundle at his chest. Through the crackle of the CB radio, he heard Sarah's voice. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "A special delivery. 4-month-old male bobcat cub, malnourished, dehydrated, cornered by wolves." A pause crackled across the static. "Dad, you know the protocol." He felt her hesitation, knew her dedication to letting nature run its course. "Oh, I know," he said softly, but he wouldn't have lasted another night. Finally, her resolve cracked. Bring him in through the back. I'll have the exam room warm." Sarah met him at the back entrance in her green scrubs, dark hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail. Jim gently unwound the jacket and lifted out the cub, whose eyes, still a pale, weary blue, blinked up at them with a spark of curiosity. He's beautiful," Sarah breathed as she took him. Inside, the room smelled of antiseptic and warmth. She checked his temperature, heart rate, and breathing, drew blood, started an 4 drip of warm fluids, and examined him head to tail. Tail. "Email," she announced, "about 4 months old, severe dehydration, malnutrition, but no fractures or deep wounds." Jim leaned against the doorframe, heart thudding in relief. "He's a fighter," Sarah said, tracing a gentle finger along his tiny spine. They needed a name. See. Jim watched Sarah tape the 4 line, her expression thoughtful. At last, she stood and smiled, hand on her hip. "A Max," she declared. "He looks like a Max." In that moment, Max, tiny, vulnerable, fierce, became someone worth believing in. Over the next week, Sarah and her team worked around the clock. They fed Max small meals of specially prepared formula, coaxed him to drink, and wrapped him in heated blankets when he shivered from exhaustion. Each time he opened his eyes, he looked at them with a wide, determined stare, as if promising to fight every step of the way. Jim visited daily, journal in hand, tracking weight gain, fur regrowth, and eye clarity. When Max finally took a tentative sniff at a live mouse through the mesh of his enclosure, it felt like watching a king reclaim his throne. Each small victory was scripted in his brightening eyes and growing strength. As Max's body grew stronger, Sarah introduced more wild elements. Hidden perches to spark his climbing instincts, live prey released in ways that forced him to stalk and pounce, and gradually less human contact so he wouldn't lose his edge. Jim continued his wolf pack studies, noting that Shadow's group had brought down an elk days after the cub incident. Proof they'd attacked Max out of desperation, not preference. The wolves adapted, and so did Max. By the time spring whispered across the forest floor, buds pushing through the thaw, Max's coat shone glossy and his limbs flexed with power he hadn't known weeks before. Release day dawned clear and brisk, the air carrying the first hint of green life. So, Sarah and Jim loaded Max into a sturdy carrier as the sun edged above the horizon, painting the sky in pale gold. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she checked his harness one last time, while Jim's throat tightened with pride and grief. Pride in grief, pride in what they'd saved. Grief in the goodbye to come. They drove to a rocky outcrop, nestled safely away from known wolf haunts but pulsing with rabbit tracks and cover for a young hunter. Sarah knelt beside the carrier, brushing Max's ears gently. "Go show them who you are, buddy," she whispered. "Boy," she whispered. The carrier door clicked open and Max paused, weighing his options. Then, with a breath that carried every ounce of his journey, he stepped into the sunlit world he'd once feared. He paused again, tail flicking as if to ask, "Will you be okay?" And in that heartbeat, Sarah and Jim felt the full weight of every choice they'd made. Then Max melted into the underbrush, a ghost of spotted fur, slipping beyond sight, leaving only a rustle of new hope behind. Back at the center, the phone buzzed non-stop with news from ranchers and hikers who'd glimpsed a sleek bobcat near the release site. Wildlife cameras caught him bounding through willows, muscles rippling, eyes alert. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving and helping to keep the ecosystem in balance. When Sarah presented Max's story at a community meeting, even ranchers who once saw predators as threats leaned forward, curious about a world where compassion and science met on common ground. A year later, Jim hiked to a hidden hollow beneath a rocky overhang, snow long gone and ferns unfurling in its place. There, in the half-light, he spotted a pair of young cubs peering out from a shallow den. Their father stood guard, a bobcat grown to full size, coat glossy and eyes golden with confidence. Jim recognized the distinctive rosettes and the way he carried himself. Max had not only survived, he'd become a parent, guiding the next generation. 5 springs on, Jim's trail camera footage showed something even more extraordinary. In the soft mud along a stream, he found a wolf's tracks and a bobcat's paw prints side by side, moving through the forest without aggression or alarm. Wolves and bobcats, once locked in life and death struggle, now shared the same space with the quiet respect that comes from balance. In that moment, Jim realized the deepest lesson of all. True conservation isn't just about saving one life, but about restoring an entire melody of voices to the wild. At the rehab center, Sarah's office still holds that single favorite photo, Max on release day, fur gleaming, eyes bright with promise. She shows it to new interns and visiting students, telling them that the hardest decision is knowing when to act and when to step back. Nature has its own wisdom, but sometimes it needs a gentle nudge. Max's story isn't just about a rescued bobcat cub. It's a symbol of hope, a reminder that compassion, guided by knowledge and respect, can tip the scales back toward balance. And somewhere out in those Montana woods, Max's legacy lives on in every soft paw print, every rustle in the undergrowth, and every new life that emerges from the snow.